Hello and welcome back to Magnetic Masculinity Podcast, where we provide men with practical tools and strategies to bridge the gap between achievement and fulfillment so that they can live their most magnetic lives. Today we're talking about a topic that I feel either isn't talked enough about or should be talked more about, which is the religion and spirituality. And maybe before we get into today's topic, can you talk a bit on the importance of talking about this topic and also maybe explain what's the difference between religion and spirituality?
Great, easy, no problem. So this is a topic I think is great. And I think that the more we have sort of open, compassionate, conscious conversations with each other, the less likely we are to stick to our belief system and use religion and spirituality as it has been used historically, which is a tool of separation or an us versus them rather than a, hey, look, we are all so united. And if you look at the common threads between a lot of different religions using different metaphors to essentially say the same thing, which is that we are all connected. And I would like to preface this episode by saying that I love whatever your relationship is or is not with God, Source, Mohammed, the universe, Jesus, all of it, Source. Any name you give it is valid because words are just a sound that come out of a hole in our face that we use to communicate giant concepts. And whatever your religion is, whatever word resonates to you or whatever word makes you feel uncomfortable is valid.
And what did you say is the difference between the religion and spirituality?
Well, again, these are all just metaphors. So how I define religion or spirituality might be different than how somebody else defines it. Because again, they're just sounds. They're not, concrete facts.
Yeah.
And there is subjective experience attached to those concepts. However, a lot of people I know, it's very popular to say, oh, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, which I think over time, personally, as somebody who definitely used to identify as very spiritual, and I used to be a little bit anti-organized religion, and now I'm just sort of accepting of everything. I don't really mind. I'm curious. I'm more curious. I don't get triggered by anything. But I think spirituality or New Ageism itself is now what we would classify as a religion, where there's a whole set of this is how many crystal bracelets you wear. This is what you eat. This is what you believe in. This is what you think. This is how you speak. Positive vibes only. Everything's love and light. You have to do this. You have to be that. And anybody who's not is 3D or unconscious or unwoke. So it's almost become its own dogmatic, dualistic tool for separation or breeding ground for shame and inauthenticity, as the religions that it broke away from to rebel against in the effort of creating more oneness, or as my company is called, one consciousness, which is what I call it. And if you look at some of the studies of modern physicists and some of my favorite theories of everything, if consciousness is the fundamental fabric, so to speak, of humanity, and everything is made of that same source energy, does it really matter what name we give it? Because at the end of the day, you're a droplet of that ocean of consciousness. I'm a droplet of that ocean of consciousness. This cup is a droplet of that ocean of consciousness. And the illusion of separation is just a collective projection of our unintegrated internal parts, our shame, our trying to fit in, and our inauthenticity, which is fine. It's just information about where we're at in humanity.
I had a question to what you said, that you got to the point where you are accepting to any religion or anything that anybody subscribes to. I feel like it could be important to touch on this. And maybe you can either speak from your experience or maybe some other people that you have worked with. Like, what was it that helped you to have that switch? Because I feel like when it comes to seeing us all as part of something bigger, or we are like part of something that is kind of togetherness, I feel like a lot of times religion, or that those differences within religion or our beliefs, can get in a way of seeing that. Like, what would you say to somebody who might struggle to accept other like religions or people believing something else, that can cause that friction or differences between us?
That's okay. First of all, if that's where you're at, I accept you. You are where you are. And I think it would be harder. So there was a time in my life where the word God irritated me, and where I poo-pooed a lot of things that I'm now like, oh, yeah, that's cool. But what was the catalyst for my change was experiencing things. So first of all, when I was born, I remembered what we would call pre-incarnation. To me, that's very normal. So when I read things, philosophers and ancient mystics and ancient religions, I'm like, oh, I see what they're trying to explain. I've experienced that. I've also spent months in silence and meditation and had completely sober experiences where I'm weeping, feeling my connection to everyone and everything. Also, after my head injury, I could see differently. I could see similar to when I was a child and then somehow grew out of it. I could see the connection to everything. I could see the fabric of consciousness weaving everything together in this reality. And I've experienced what people would call God or the universe or angels. I've experienced those things. So I don't necessarily expect somebody to believe me or what I say if they haven't had those experiences. So I would say be open-minded, but also keep your skepticism. But just think, how would I want to be treated if I was that person in that religion? Or you can, if that's where you're at, you can prefer, like, here's some different sticky notes. I like variety. I do all my best thinking with sticky notes. It's a very sophisticated system. Here's a bunch of different colors of sticky notes. They all kind of serve the same purpose. But if I prefer red sticky notes, then I'm like, this is what I only use: red sticky notes. Sticky notes, red sticky notes are what I know. It's the only thing I've ever used. I don't have to hate the other colors of sticky notes. I can just prefer red. So maybe the first step is from like good, bad, right, wrong. I hate this one. This one's the best. There's just a bunch of variety of flavors, and you can prefer one flavor without hating the other flavor. Because think about how boring it would be to incarnate on Earth if there was only one flavor of the buffet. And we all believed the same thing and thought the same thing. And I think it would be exceedingly boring. And the other thing is that when we have that internal need to like make others bad or wrong, it's not worth judging ourselves about, but it might be a divine invitation for us to go back to some of the episodes where we talked about shame and about fitting in. Because if we're in that state, which is a valid state of wanting to make others bad or wrong, and we're in that state of like, I need to be good and right, and they are bad or wrong, that's just a very helpful information. That is some very helpful information that informs us that there's a lot of shame in our subconscious, right? It's that I have to be good because if I don't fit in, I'm not worthy of love and belonging. Like we talked about, love and belonging is the number one biological, neurological, scientifically inarguable need of the human species. The absence of that is loneliness. The barrier between the two is shame. But in order to receive love and belonging, because we're currently evolving out of the emotional dark ages, we have confused fitting in with love and belonging. So in order to be worthy of our number one need as a human being, we start looking at, oh, I have to be good. Therefore, everything that is bad, and I don't want to be bad because then I won't be worthy of love and I won't fit in. So when we need to make others bad, that's just an indication in our body that we have some unintegrated parts. because when we end up in those mindsets, which are totally normal, there's no shame in shame. When we end up in those mindsets of separation and wanting to make others bad or wrong, and we're in a belief system or a model, they're all just models. They're just models for how the universe works, or how source works, or God, or whatever you prefer to call it, the universe, consciousness itself. When we are stuck in the confines of one model, then it's more challenging. How do I say this? It's more challenging to integrate our subconscious parts, because we've been taught that this is bad and wrong, that you can't lie, you can't cheat, you can't be selfish, you can only be of service to others. And we are basically forcing ourselves to deprive ourselves of our authentic wants, needs, boundaries, and values that we keep talking about in this podcast. And while I agree with a lot of those things, I think we should not lie and cheat and hurt each other, and we should be kind to our neighbor. And I also think that if we're not finding healthy ways to meet our needs, that's when our more shadowy, obnoxious, passive aggressive, on the low end of that is the whining, nagging, passive aggressive, martyring, self-sacrificing, any of our codependent tendencies, right up to molestation, rape, murder, So yeah, I think that if the less focused we are on how to fit into a certain model, and the more focused we are on how we're all similar, and the more skillful we are, as we've talked about in previous episodes, about eating our shit sandwiches instead of being like, I'm not bad or wrong, I don't do anything bad or wrong, those guys are bad or wrong. Just looking at, hey, we probably all have stuff to work on. We're probably all doing our best, and we probably all have amazing gifts, and we've probably all had some pretty crappy trauma because we grew up in the emotional dark ages. So let's see how we can support each other, whether you call it Mohammed or source or science or whatever you believe in. Remember that we're all connected by this fabric of consciousness, and sort of old concepts of God were projections from humanity of how we were taught, this sort of punishing, right? It's like we sort of projected these characteristics onto God that we experience. Like, if you're a bad boy, you'll be punished, but if you're a good boy, you'll get a reward. What kind of an all-inclusive God would actually feel that way? At least my experiences with God or source have been very, and when I'm in those states of those samadhi states, or downloading and sort of in that out of body state, my experiences with God or source have been one of very inclusionary and very loving. And again, I've had those experiences, so it's easier for me to have that perspective, I suppose.
How can men balance that wanting to be good practitioner for their religion with like their authentic self, especially when both of them might be, or there might be some aspects of them that are like clashing?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That is a tough one. And I think that, again, you're either at some point going to have to choose to fit in with others. But if you're doing it at the expense of abandoning your authentic self, you're not going to feel happy and fulfilled. So if you can find a way to accept others where they are, and if your family is like very indoctrinated in a certain religion, I have clients who have particular religious traumas, and one or two clients in particular who were raised in extremely rigid, old types of very strict religion, and were very traumatized by that, like taught that sex was dirty, publicly humiliated and shamed if they were believed to be attracted to the opposite sex before a certain age, or masturbation was like the sign of the devil. So if you have those natural proclivities that we all have as humanity, and you've been taught that those are bad or wrong, and you're trying to fit in with the others, you are abandoning yourself. So I have a client who can go and visit her family who are still very much in this particular community. And she can accept them where they are now. She doesn't get triggered by them, but she just has a different way that she chooses to live her life. But she is still actually she's a very good person and a lot less likely to act up than the group that she left, because they are not getting any of their needs met. So it's actually become a very toxic, codependent, shame-filled, angry environment, because that's what happens when nobody gets their needs met and everybody's just too busy trying to fit in and trying to be good. They're not even being good because they just genuinely want to be good to other people. They're being good. So again, often it's the energy behind the action, as I've said in other episodes. So this is something I wrote a paper about in high school when I thought religion was absurd at that time. And I had not experienced consciousness and angels and things like that I've experienced now in deep states of meditation or after my head injury and near-death experience. But I used to say, like, okay, maybe you shouldn't lie and shouldn't cheat and shouldn't whatever, all of these things, just because you're a good person. But when we did this like little course on religion in high school, I was like, so everybody's doing the right thing because they're afraid of being punished. So they're not actually doing it from just a loving energy of like, why would I want to do those things? I didn't do those things to people, but I didn't not do them out of fear. I did them because I was in a state of love and abundance. And when we're in our natural, we could use the word spiritual state of connection to everything, you don't have to tell people, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. They're so happy. Their cup is so full, overfilling on others. They feel their connection to everyone and everything. You don't have to tell them that because they just would not do that. So my paper was about like, aren't people doing the right thing for really selfish reasons, but their whole self-concept is that they're not selfish and they're only doing things for others? And I was like, when I looked at those groups of people, I didn't see them as terribly happy. Not that there's nothing good with organized religions. I think there's a lot of beautiful things, and all religions are different. And I would like to recognize that I'm throwing Buddha and Allah and Muhammad and God and the universe and source and consciousness and atheism all into one tiny little bucket, which is absurd. And I think that there are beautiful parts of every religion, really beautiful parts and really accurate parts from the model. They're trying to explain models for how the universe works and those age-old questions of why are we here? What does it all mean? And what happens when we die? Because a lot of people are afraid of that. I'm not afraid of that. So yeah, does that answer your question?
And I have a follow-up. Well, probably there's a few follow-up questions here, but you said about the state of love and abundance versus kind of doing things because you have to do them based on like religion. What did you say is the opposite of that state of love and abundance?
Fear.
And like with that, even
fear and shame.
Okay, because I'm just thinking of some people listening, if that's what could be some of the things that could help them to identify which one they are, because one of them can be you authentically operating from place of like state of love and abundance, and you still can do the same from each of the states in actions, but it's about that like what you talk like what's behind the action. So how can they distinguish like which one is which?
Well, I'd also like to say, just to add a little layer of complexity here, that I think sometimes there's also validity in fake it till you become it. So I also, from a different perspective, depending on what level of consciousness somebody's at, I could see validity or benefit to giving them a model and meeting them where they're at, because you couldn't just have all of humanity be in a state of love and oneness and abundance at that time. It was a very hard time on the planet and people were in survival mode. So in some ways, I would also like to acknowledge that those models probably saved their lives and might have brought them out of, raping and pillaging and beating and fighting into, they might have got them from a 2 to a 5. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I also acknowledge that sometimes those models and that energy behind the action is not without is not without value. And it may have very well been what we needed as the catalyst to help us make that little evolutionary step. But I think that now we are maybe ready to expand that evolutionary model out a little bit and remember that we're all connected. But again, I see, oh, and to answer your question, if you just wouldn't even think about, oh, I see a little beetle on the sidewalk on its back. Help. I'm not like, oh, I better do that or God will punish me. I just am naturally like, oh my gosh, that little beetle part of me is suffering, and I flip it over. If somebody's bitchy at the grocery store and having a meltdown, I just think, oh, they're having a really bad day, that part of me. I've had a bad day. I know what that feels like. It's okay. So in no way do I ever think I have to do this or else. Now, I used to, like I remember with manifestation and gratitude, it was almost the same thing. When I first was in spirituality in my 20s, it would be like, okay, dear universe, I'm going to be super grateful, and then you're going to give me a treat. Like, oh, look, I did my gratitude practice. I did this, I did that, which is why I tell people spirituality is no different than any other religion. It can be used in a very helpful way, in a very healthy way, or it can be weaponized and used in an unhealthy way. The difference between the two is the level of fear and shame in the person who is using that. And at the end of the day, there's no judgment on my part in that either. It's all just information that helps inform us of where that particular person or that particular group is in their evolutionary journey. And they are all a part of us. So to me, I just seek it with curiosity and a passion for growth and optimization of our human experience.
And the second follow-up question I had was about what you mentioned about being a good person. So how can a person, let's say, deal with a situation where, according to religion, they did something that's making them a bad person, even though it might be actually in alignment with their authentic self? How can they not see them as a bad person for doing that?
Well, again, this whole good person, bad person, good, bad, right, wrong, this very old-fashioned dualistic way of looking at things is normal, but it's suboptimal. It's not our ideal state of being. So we can assume that everybody at their core being is a good person, whatever that means. And we can assume that everybody has parts that they've integrated and parts that are yet to be integrated. We're not meant to be born and then only live in perfection, because here in Earth School, we're meant to grow and expand and evolve, right? The same as evolution happens. If we started going down in evolution, that would not be great, but then we'd have to look at what is the cause of this. So the first thing is looking at the difference between shame and guilt. So shame is, I am bad or wrong. That person is bad or wrong. Guilt is, oh, I feel bad because I'm a really good person, and feeling bad about something I did is really helpful information that informs me where boundaries are. And it's assuming that I am a good person that does not want to become blind to the ways that we're being obnoxious, because we're all being obnoxious. So again, it's like, it's embracing all of those parts of ourselves, embracing the shadow. I am like overflowing with happiness and abundance and love spreading wherever I go, but I am also deeply in tune with my needs, and I get my needs met. So I'm like, I love being spoiled. I love being indulgent, and like anything, if I'm like advocating for myself and confident in myself and asking for what I want, not forcing people to do what I want, but I'm aligning myself with people that are like, I would love to do that, then I'm far less likely to act out subconscious maladaptive coping mechanisms and become bad. But as far as looking at somebody that we see as bad, I just don't look at people that way. So let me think for a minute. I mean,
or what maybe like with this, something that would help is thinking about like what makes people, because I think that's another layer to this, is looking at people as, even let's say different religion, looking at them as bad while I'm being good because
Yeah.
my religion is the best religion. Even like what are some of the reasons that makes people to look at others and think that this person is bad?
Shame. Programming. It's in our vehicle of consciousness. It's software that you have been programmed with, that this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. It's a very binary black and white way of looking at things. And again, because we're so desperate to fit in and be worthy of love and belonging, it helps us to be like, look, I am good and you are bad. And when people are doing that, it's a sign that there's probably a layer of shame or inauthenticity that we're being invited to explore. And I would invite, when looking at other people and you notice that inner judger come out, which we don't want to judge the judger if we're doing parts work, right? We don't want to judge the judger. We just want to observe that we're judging. And we want to be curious about the other person, right? Like a lot of people, if I tell people, I think I look really pretty today, and I'm really smart, I'm super good at my job, people might get triggered AF because they have been taught, be humble, don't brag, don't be a show off, don't think whatever. A lot of programming that I also had in childhood. Don't brag, don't be a show off, don't be better than anybody. However, because I own my awesome, I'm also very comfortable at owning my shit. And I don't mind making other people uncomfortable because I want to model something different to them. Whereas if we were all like, I'm amazing, I'm awesome, like, look at me, I'm so proud of myself, it's not going to be, I'm better than you. So I've written several articles or posts about this, that what we might refer to as self-centeredness is actually the antidote to the shadow side of self-centeredness, where we're shadowy and like, I have to be better than you. It's more like, here I am, I'm letting my light shine, and I invite all of you to stand around me and let your light shine too, because I'm awesome and you're awesome and you're awesome and you're awesome and you're awesome. And sometimes I'm a shit and sometimes you're a shit. And that's what my spiritual practice is radical accountability and acceptance, that everything is perfect. God or the universe is not looking down at us like, you're bad. They're like, it's more like, oh, you went from kindergarten peeing on other kids in the sandbox or punching kids in the face to grade 3. That's amazing. It's not like, why aren't you in grad school yet? You know, we're all here in different levels of consciousness. We've all had different numbers of incarnations. We have all had different layers of trauma. We've all had collective trauma, epigenetic trauma. We've all, we're just now evolving out of the emotional dark ages. So it's just more a matter of curiosity and compassion. And that also includes boundaries. So it doesn't mean we allow people's obnoxious behavior to impact you. But we're in a state of trying to become less fear and more love, as many people have said over the decades, because fear is the opposite of love. So we maybe used to be 90% fearful. Now we're 70% fearful. And we've got a little bit more love. But I think we're on the right trajectory.
Here I have a follow-up question to what you said about that programming of like, pretty much like when we talked about good person, bad person, that it's just programming. With that, as you were speaking, a thought came to me of like, why don't we question it? Why don't we just assume that that's the way it is? Because I feel like the moment we start to question, we start to be open to kind of different kind of perspectives or approaches towards things.
You nailed it. What else do I have to say? You nailed it.
So the question would be like, why don't we question? Why is it that we don't question it?
Well, lack of awareness, metacognition. I'm doing a live event about that coming up soon. that helps us reprogram, because most 90 to 95% of our perceptual awareness is subconscious, right? That program, that software is running your vehicle of consciousness and you're not piloting it. And it's piloting you to your self-concept of what the programming told you rather than rerouting you to authentic alignment. So the first thing is to start to be curious. So one tool that I sometimes give people is every time you think a thought or say something out loud, ask yourself, who does that belong to? And I think this has been done for decades. I don't know who originally invented that idea, or I would love to credit them, but I've heard it many times over the decades. It's just, who does that belong to? And it's just starting to help yourself separate your thoughts from reality. Like I realized in my journey of authentic alignment that a lot of things that I believed really did not align with what I believed. Like I just started questioning, is this helpful? So I would ask myself, is this helpful or unhelpful programming? Doesn't matter where the programming came from. You don't have to blame anybody. My parents did this to me. It doesn't have to be like that. They did their best. You're doing your best. We're all obnoxious and we're all divine. So it's more about starting again to have curiosity and compassion. And remember that most of it's just software. So it's not even you. But you want to start, if you want to start piloting that vehicle of consciousness and you want to start tapping into that potential and wiring and programming your own very beneficial, benevolent software, the first thing you're going to have to start doing is using metacognition or awareness and questioning. And just sort of being curious and say, does this make me feel loved and connected, or does this make me feel better than? And then you'll know, oh, this is part of my ego, or this is, oh, I'm an ego. That's so helpful to know. And then cheer yourself on. Anytime you notice yourself doing something obnoxious or unhelpful, or I'll sometimes say things that I'll think, that's a bunch of nonsense. But I laugh about it, or I'm very compassionate about it, or I celebrate it. So I encourage people in my world to come to me and celebrate when they're like, guess what? I think I'm a little bit of a racist. And I'm like, oh, that's amazing. Tell me about the part of you that's a racist. And they'll tell me, and I'm like, wow, that's not great programming. But I'm so proud of you for looking at that. Let's question that, but we'd be like, it's so bad to be a racist that we would become blind to any way that we might have some of that really unhelpful programming, because it's bad to be that and I am good. Another example of this is, think about when you do something obnoxious, or you're angry at somebody, or you behave like a brat, or you're like rude to somebody on the subway, or whatever it is. What we tend to do when we behave like jerks is we go, oh, but it's because I didn't get enough sleep last night and that guy elbowed me and this, and we give all these reasons for it. And then if somebody else does it, we're like, they're bad. If you ever notice that, think about it, right? If somebody else says, we're like, how could they do that? They're bad. Because shame loves to make other people bad and wrong, especially in religion, because there's so much, this is good and this is bad and this is right and this is wrong, that it actually, that separation disconnects our vehicle of consciousness from that World Wide Web source consciousness God that we are collectively experiencing or not experiencing, depending on how plugged in we are or not.
With that pointing the fingers, what's the role of, and probably even above that, when it comes to navigating different religions that we might not agree with? What's the role of empathy within all this?
That's a great question. I think the state of empathy, again, I think empathy is something that we can always grow and develop. And if it's not there, that's okay. So
maybe can you describe empathy first?
Sure. So how I am accepting the sound that you said, empathy, to myself, is the capacity to feel for others, or to try at least to put ourselves in others' shoes. And not always assuming we know what they feel, that's not empathy, but just being curious about their experience, being curious about what they are feeling, and acknowledging that no different than me, that person probably has suboptimal programming. That person is probably working on coming back into their authentic alignment, or that person, if you want to refer back to our episodes about parts work and the multidimensionality of our personalities, is in a hostile takeover. And it's that almost constant compassion. I am nowadays accepted my own sacred conscious relationship, because that's where we get to do the deepest work with all our little scared parts. But in general in life, almost nothing triggers or bothers me. I choose to eat a vegan lifestyle, and I have a client who's a trophy hunter. I don't see anybody that one of my spiritual practices is radical acceptance. So part of acceptance is accepting that some things need changing. So I'm not in the shadow side of acceptance, which I've seen where people are like, I accept everything just as it is. I accept all my parts exactly as they are. And I'm like, well, that is terrifying, because you have a lot of things to work on. But it's more that acceptance of like, I'm not God. They're here on the planet. Everybody has crap they can work on. Everybody has crap they don't work on. And I always assume in any given moment that I have blind spots, that I have things that I'm doing that are suboptimal, that I have beliefs that are not worthy of having. So I assume all of those things about myself. Then when I find them, I don't make it mean that I'm bad or wrong. I make it mean I just leveled up in the game.
And within this, in case if there's some people, which I think it's all of us, me including, in that category of people who sometimes we catch ourselves having those thoughts or pointing fingers or, doing those things. What did you say are some of the things or some of the steps that can be taken to improve that empathy or be less judgmental and more accepting or compassionate?
Just be curious. I use that word a lot. Just be curious, because and practice a lot of self-compassion. And it never helps to have a sense of humor. So I'm not saying I'm impervious to those behaviors. And believe you me, I have participated in every obnoxious, every codependent, I have judged, I have blamed, I have been greedy, I have been selfish, I have manipulated, I've done all of it. I'm just very aware of it, because I don't make those things mean that I'm bad or wrong, which is why I no longer need to play those things out. But occasionally I'll notice a little inner judger and I'll be like, whoa, look at her. Doesn't she know? And I just kind of look at it with curiosity and I kind of smirk and I'm like, I'm totally judging that person right now. And then later on, if it's something that gave me like a charge, usually I'm nowadays, not always in my life, but I'm almost always in the state of the observer. So it's sort of like watching different characters in a play. I've got part of me who's like, that's amazing. And I've got part of me who's like, who does she think she is? And I've got, and I just sort of watch it all with a little bit of a sense of humor. But if I'm really triggered or activated by something somebody else is doing, I would follow my trigger protocol. People can reach out to us if they want a copy of that, and find out if I've got shadow work to do, or if I have an old wound to heal, or if it's a sign of trauma, or if it's an unintegrated part, or it's us judging in others, like when people judge me for being confident and self-promoting. It might mean they're like, and they get really triggered and start judging. But it's because that inner judger thinks that if they were like that, they would be bad or wrong. So that inner part is trying to protect them. But they also have another part in them that wants that. Don't we all want to be loved and appreciated and adored and admired and accepted? And don't we all deserve that? And imagine what a world will feel like when we remember that we are all connected, and we remember that everybody's a part of us, and we remember that what we do to others, we do to ourselves. So, and actually that's another thing in some ways. I used to coach people with Asperger's, or some people with very challenging diagnoses like narcissism or borderline personality disorder. And I don't mind. I meet people wherever they're at. Those are just shame disorders. They're just coping mechanisms. So in that case, I would sometimes use that same strategy, and I'd be like, well, what you do to others, you do to yourself. And then they're like, uh-oh, and I better not do that to others. But it starts to rewire their brain. So you meet people where they're at. So again, I don't find that there's no value in some of that thinking. It's just about, I don't know. Is that helpful?
And the last question I had about with living in the modern like era or age, have you noticed or have you seen any challenges that men might be facing when it comes to balancing religion and the modern life? Because everything is shifting so rapidly, so quickly. Are there any challenges when it comes to practicing or staying true to their religion when it comes to living in modern world?
Well, I would invite them to examine if staying true to their religion, what that means to them, and making sure that staying true to their religion also allows them to have authentic alignment. Because again, there's no amount of self-sacrifice that's going to help your life feel fulfilling, period. And a lot of my clients are having what we would call more spiritual experiences. And there's lots of groups with really good science of brain technology to help you accelerate like a decade of meditation and changing your brain waves, or have out-of-body exploration, or scientists like Tom Campbell and Dean Radin and all kinds of scientists all over the world that are helping us bridge that gap between science and religion and metaphysics. And so a lot of them are craving to have some more of that in their life. Like I've had CEOs sitting in sessions where we're talking about leadership development or conscious relationships. And they're like, Sandy, I got to ask you, what happens? Can you explain karma to me? Or can you explain reincarnation to me? Like we are, the word is commonly used, awakening. People are having spiritual awakenings. Again, depending on how we define that word, people are waking up, evolving, being triggered by the collective consciousness, because there's more of that in the overall algorithm now that we are downloading. So people are spontaneously logging on, so to speak, and downloading things and starting to have their own experiences and starting to be curious. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I think I see it happening everywhere with lots of executives and entrepreneurs that I work with. And they're like, yeah, they're having these experiences. Or people like Bob Monroe, who was a business tycoon and had a spontaneous out-of-body experience. And then he funded the Monroe Institute, which I love, and I love the work they do. Scientists like Tom Campbell, all these people that are physicists that are saying, wait a minute, maybe there is no woo-woo, maybe there is no supernatural, which to me always seemed, I guess, obvious, because how I saw the world, I've learned now later in life, is differently than how most people see the world. So a lot of those things to me, I'm like, well, yeah, what did everybody else think was happening? And then I learn that people have very different perceptions of how this experience on this planet works.
Right. So that's religion. Anything you want to add?
No, everybody can feel free always to ask questions. And wherever you are or are not, whether you believe in God, believe in Allah, believe in Buddha, believe in science, don't believe in anything at all, wherever you are is perfect. And I would just invite you to start practicing metacognition, maybe re-listen to some of these podcast episodes, or do it from the beginning to end again. So it just starts getting deeper into those neural pathways. And just be curious, compassionate, and have a sense of humor. And remember, we are all connected. We are one consciousness.
All right. We'll see you next week.